Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Soumya, and I'm a volunteer at InDialogue Foundation. So, today in this InDialogue online series, we will be revisiting Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. in the context of Black Lives Matter movement. This lecture will be taken by Mr. S.N. Sahu, who has served late Mr. K.R. Narayan, President of India, as officer on special duty and press secretary. And he also had a tenure as director in the Prime Minister's office and joint secretary in Rajya Sabha Secretariat. He is a student of collected works of Mahatma Gandhi and writings of Dr. Ambedkar, Jawaharlal Nehru, and Swami Vivekananda. He has also authored several articles on diverse issues like Corona Menace demonstrates fragility of human-dominated planet and revisiting Ambedkar on epidemics, treatment bias, and Hindu Raj. And other topics such as when Gandhi examined a will and Zomato case bring back the images of Hindu tea and Muslim tea in colonial India. So with that, we can start our lecture, which is at 6 a.m. This lecture will be for 45 minutes. And after that, we will be taking questions that you can send on the chat box. For 30 minutes, we'll have our Q&A session. So I would ask all of you to take notes and ask all your questions there. Thank you. Mr. Sahu, we can start. Thank you.
Okay. So thanks a lot, Soumya ji and InDialogue Foundation for organizing this opportunity for me on a very, very crucial and burning topic, which is agitating the minds of people across the world. Black Lives Matter, and the kind of movement, the kind of unity that is there in the field, unity which is bringing together both blacks, whites, and colored people, and the kind of opinion that it has generated, across the world. In that context, we need to understand that the great ideas and ideals of Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King are deeply relevant, and of course, both Gandhi and King's vision has become a guiding and motivating force, to sustain such a movement. And so therefore, it is important to revisit the worldviews of Gandhi and Martin Luther King. Now, all of us know that few days back on 9th June, today is 13th, I think on 9th June, 9th June was the anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi's brutal throwing out of a train in Pietermaritzburg in South Africa in 1893. On 9th June night, he was thrown out of the train just because the skin of his color was not white, even though he had a valid ticket to travel. Okay, so he was thrown out of the train, and then he went to a waiting hall in South Africa to sit there in biting cold. And that room of that Pietermaritzburg railway station where he sat, that room became the birthplace of his active nonviolence. Okay, so that active nonviolence which was born there because he wanted to come back from South Africa after he was ill-treated and he was thrown out of the train, but his inner voice told him, don't go back, fight it out. Then Gandhi joined that inner voice with a debate, asking as to how you would fight. And that inner voice said, with nonviolence. So that is where, in the modern phase of human history, nonviolence was applied in South Africa by Gandhi, in the context of, deeply layered racism which was oppressing blacks, which was denying equal opportunities to the Indians who were settled there or who were there working. So, that is the reason why, Martin Luther King was deeply influenced by Gandhi's ideals. And he started that movement in US for racial justice, for civil rights, and for a society informed by the ideals of American Constitution. So, it's very interesting. See, George Floyd, whose neck was violently crushed by the knee of a police officer, and that crushing of the neck was so severe, he was gasping for breath and in fact said, "I can't breathe." That became the, inspiring, slogan, for Black Lives, Matter movement. Now, you see, somebody who was not able to breathe because of the, because his neck was being crushed by the, lethal force of the knee of a police officer, that, search for fresh breath of air informed by racial equality was emphasized by Martin Luther King. Now, it's very important how, Martin Luther King, he wanted a non-violent, creative tension in society so that, unequal laws, unjust laws, or unjust structures of the society based on racial inequality would be challenged, and a society and an order would be established informed by brotherhood, equality, and equal opportunity. Now, in the context of that particular line that "I can't breathe," which was pathetically uttered by George Floyd, and he appealed to the police officer, to lift his knee. That was such a terrible plight, which was, represented in those lines. "I can't breathe." Now, it is instructive to note that, Martin Luther King, in many of his writings, it's important to read Martin Luther King's writings because of the ideas and because of the wonderful English in which they were written. So he also talked about a airtight, Martin Luther King was describing the racial inequality prevailing in US, and it described that structure of society based on racial inequality is a society which was airtight, where it was difficult to breathe. I mean, just imagine Martin Luther King was writing that in 1954. That famous letter he wrote from Birmingham jail in US. So, he was referring to an airtight society. An airtight society based on poverty, inequality, lynching of blacks, and celebration of unjust laws, and the necessity to question, interrogate, and change those unjust laws by non-violent method. This is remarkable. The airtight society which Martin Luther King referred to in 1954, okay, and in 2014, okay, after so many decades, somebody was not able to breathe. George Floyd was not able to breathe. Now, so what was, in the context of the movement for Blacks Lives Matter, the remarkable aspect of this movement is coming together of whites, blacks, and colored people, and support it has generated from among the conscientious and thinking people from across the world, from Europe, from large parts of the world. Okay, so therefore, what they have done is, and what it actually, it takes us back to that vision of Gandhi and Martin Luther King, because both of them, they said injustice and oppression could be fought without sense of revenge. Remarkable. King, in his Nobel Prize acceptance speech, Martin Luther categorically stated that injustice and oppression can be addressed without a sense of revenge, without any ill will against those who are perpetuating injustice and oppression. This kind of approach that was outlined by Martin Luther King was actually operationalized by Mahatma Gandhi in South Africa and in India when he was spearheading the struggle for independence. Now, in this context, Martin Luther King said, when people or the Black people, they have to fight for their lives, they have to fight for just laws to protect their lives, to protect their rights to access, to have access to education, to have access to all other forms of equality. Both law has to be used, the moral values have to be used, the existing institutions have to be used, and at the same time, non-violent method has to be used to fight against the mindset of those people who wanted to perpetuate that structure of inequality. So he said, if a law is unjust, that has to be fought, and to fight that unjust law, we need to pay the penalty. This is so striking because exactly the same thing was underlined by Mahatma Gandhi when he started Champaran Satyagraha in India in 1917. Martin Luther King was talking about employment of law to address the challenges of a structured form of inequality. Challenges which was coming from the structured form of equality, and that structured form of equality was racism, which was given legal sanctity, through segregation laws in US. So he fought against the segregation laws, and for which ultimately he had to pay, ultimately he had to lay down his life. The supreme sacrifice of laying down his life to fight against the segregated forms of law, which, discriminated blacks against the whites. So therefore, he was, like Gandhi, for instance. Gandhi said, I violated the law prevailing in Champaran because I was tuned to a higher law. Champaran Satyagraha, which ensured justice to the, farmers who were forced to plant indigo, who were dictated to plant indigo by British planters. So Gandhi challenged that law by breaking, that law, and he considered in the court of law that he broke the law. And when the magistrate asked, why did you break the law? He said, I broke the law because he was tuned to the higher law of conscience. Exactly the same thinking one finds in Martin Luther King's writings. He said, we need to break unjust laws because we are tuned to the higher law of morality. Okay? So the unjust crushing of the neck of George Floyd, by the sheer pressure. Can you hear me? Hello? 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 Are you able to hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, because suddenly, your picture disappeared, from my screen.
Yeah.
Okay, so therefore Martin Luther King's vision, which we find getting amply demonstrated in the Black Lives Movement, because they are talking about the unity and solidarity of all people, to fight against injustice. And largely this Black Lives Movement, Black Lives Matter movement is largely non-violent, bearing few instances of violence. This is largely non-violent because it challenges the oppression, and that too in a non-violent manner, and by forging unity and solidarity among different sections of society. Okay, this was emphasized by Mahatma Gandhi and by Martin Luther King when they were fighting, Gandhi fighting for the rights of Indians and Martin Luther King fighting for the rights of blacks. But then while fighting for the rights of blacks, he made a very interesting point. He said that, he was invoking Socrates. Repeatedly, he was invoking Socrates. He was repeatedly invoking Christ. He said, if Christ, he said, Socrates even was described as an extremist. Even Christ was crucified because of his fight for justice. Okay, and it's very interesting to note that Mahatma Gandhi described, few examples from few, personalities from history and mythology as the examples of Satyagraha. Because when he started Satyagraha in South Africa, and after that he employed those principles of Satyagraha in the context of India, he famously stated, who were the Satyagrahis before us? I mean, who were the role models of Satyagrahi? So while giving the role models of Satyagrahi from mythology and history, he picked up 5 examples. First Satyagrahi, according to Gandhi, was Bhakt Prahalad of Hindu mythology. Prahalad was persecuted by his father, for uttering the name of Lord Hari. His father said, no, Hari was his enemy. He should not utter, and his father wanted to kill him. But Prahalad, while reciting the name of Lord Hari, he never prayed Lord Hari to kill his father, eliminate his father. So Gandhi said, like Prahalad, you have to fight against British rule, against the perpetrators of injustice, without ill will against those oppressors. And second Satyagrahi according to Gandhi was Socrates. And third Satyagrahi according to Gandhi was Jesus Christ. Fourth Satyagrahi according to Gandhi was Imam Hussain from Islam. And fifth Satyagrahi according to Gandhi was a woman Satyagrahi from Hindu mythology, that was Mirabai. So all of these, great personalities from history and mythology, they fought against, persecution and injustice without any hatred. So the way Gandhi invoked Socrates in the context of nonviolent struggle, and he also invoked Jesus Christ, Martin Luther King, in his numerous speeches, he was repeatedly referring to Socrates and Jesus Christ. He said, we have to break the unjust law, but for that, we need to be visited by penalty. In other words, the suffering. So suffering one's own self constitutes a reservoir of non-violent power. Okay, so therefore, both Gandhi and Martin Luther King, they were emphasizing on this suffering, and this movement for Black Lives Matter is rooted in that creative suffering. The way people have faced, National Guards in US, somebody is pushed and he suffers head injury. Even President Trump threatened to deploy military force to suppress it. But in face of such threat, the movement got intensified and largely it remained nonviolent. So therefore, today when in 21st century, when humanity is facing a pandemic, after a century, and when, people are breathing through their masks, George Floyd wanted to breathe. I can't breathe. When you are saying I can't breathe, people were putting a mask on their faces to breathe. They wanted to breathe air free from coronavirus. Whereas George Floyd wanted to breathe, breathe in a society free from pandemic and the pandemic of racialism. So therefore, in today's context, when we are confronting a pandemic and at the same time, when somebody loses life, pathetically pleading that I can't breathe, what is required is that non-violent creative energy to sustain our spirit. Okay, so Martin Luther King, in his Nobel Prize acceptance speech, if you read that speech, it's remarkable. It's important to revisit that speech. So he was repeatedly pleading for, an approach which would be free from revenge and retaliation. He wanted equality for Blacks. He wanted right to life of Blacks, the right to vote for Blacks, right to ride in the same bus, and right to have access to education in the same school where whites are getting admitted. This in totality constitutes the, what do you call, the broad spectrum rights, broad spectrum rights which are at the root of, the movement for Black Lives Matter. The Black Lives Matter doesn't just emphasize on crude right to life. It also underlines access to other entitlements which are due to any citizen in a civilized and free society. So Martin Luther King's, exposition or his, description of American society of 1950s, that it is an airtight society of poverty, racial inequality. That airtight society of poverty and racial inequality is being carried forward in a different way through police brutality, through racial discrimination in day-to-day lives, through lynchings not only in US, but also in India. Last 1 or 2 years, we are facing such gory, scenes of people getting lynched in the name of food, in the name of religion, in the name of dress. Okay, so therefore, lives matter. Now the right to life has been interpreted by law and jurisprudence in terms of many other attributes. Right to clean air, right to shelter, right to work, right to education. In a much more connected world, even now connectivity, right to connectivity is a human right. The founder of Facebook, he said, what's his name? The founder of Facebook, um, Zuckerberg. Yeah. So he said, are you able to hear me? I can't hear you. Okay. So, so therefore, even Muhammad Yunus, the founder of the Grameen Bank in Bangladesh, he also got Nobel Prize for Peace for introducing microcredit. And that which actually that empowered women in self-help groups, improved their living conditions, their living standards and so on and so forth. He said, access to credit is a human right. So when, this human right has been expanded to a great extent to include not just a crude right to live, but many other rights. Even now it is said that women's rights are human rights. Okay, so therefore, Black Lives Matter is rooted, that movement is rooted in broad spectrum rights. That broad spectrum rights, Johan Galtung from Norway, he was, once saying that, when the communists, they said, we want distributive justice, and all those who were subscribing to laissez-faire economy, they were talking about growth. Then communists came, no, we want distributive justice. Then after that, the environmentalists came, they said, we want green, the rights for the tribals, rights for the forest dwellers. So the rights rooted in, environmental issues. Then, so he said what is required is a, broad spectrum right, which would include all the colors of the, the sun. It's not just one color or one spectrum of right. So broad spectrum. So therefore this, Black Lives Matter, when it is talked about, and the, the martyrdom of George Floyd or martyrdom of, Martin Luther King, that actually underlines the broad spectrum rights. And most importantly, the right to life, because right to life is the source from which all of the rights flow. So therefore, when Gandhi, during freedom struggle, he, some Black Americans, they came to meet him. So I wrote an article, when Barack Obama visited India and addressed the Parliament of India, and the members of Parliament assembled together in the Central Hall, I wrote an article, Gandhi, African Americans and Barack Obama. You'd be, rather it is instructive to note that when Gandhi was thrown out of the, first class train compartment, even though he had a valid ticket, just because his color of the skin was different. And when he next day reached Pretoria, one African American helped him to get into a hotel. And during freedom struggle, so Gandhi was helped by African American, and it is there in the, my experiments with truth. And then during freedom struggle, many African Americans came to India, met Gandhi, and he said, they said, your method was required to ensure justice for the blacks. They requested Gandhi to come to America to fight their cause. Then Gandhi told that if you would succeed in India, then only he would think of going to America. Okay, then he said, but if you have faith in nonviolence, one day African Americans or blacks would unleash the forces of, unleash the energy of nonviolence, and they will actually offer a lesson to the whole world. These are the statements of Gandhi in 1936-37 when he met the black Americans. Okay, and predictably, in 1960s, it was Martin Luther, 50s and early 60s, it was Martin Luther King who in fact unleashed that energy of nonviolence. And that nonviolence is the, the main motive force for the Black Lives Matter movement, which has become widespread in America and which is now becoming global. So therefore, in that context, what is required, to sustain this movement, to take it from one level to another higher level is, the employment of just law, employment of nonviolent method, and the ability to suffer. In fact, Martin Luther King, in many of his, he said, that famous speech, I am young, I too have a dream. That famous speech is still inspiring, movements across the world. When I remember Rajiv Gandhi went to, America, after becoming prime minister, he addressed the American Congress. He quoted Martin Luther King, I am young, I too have a dream. How Martin Luther King impacted the mind of the Prime Minister of India. And those powerful, electrifying words are now impacting the minds of young people across the world. When we are fighting a pandemic caused by a virus and the man-made disaster caused by racial inequality or inequality in any form. Even in India, we are facing this police brutality. The way police is arresting people even during this pandemic. Pregnant women are being put behind bars. Stringent laws are, slapped on them just for protesting. So therefore, the lessons of Gandhi and Martin Luther King's life, offers us an opportunity to, revisit to look at the Black Lives, Matter movement from a wider perspective of history. Because, in India, last year, we witnessed countrywide protest against some laws which some citizens thought are unjust. So similarly in America, there are many laws against which Martin Luther King raised his voice, started movements, and he trained people to follow nonviolent method. Systematic training was given. That systematic training in application of nonviolent method is extremely important for our tribe. Martin Luther King used to say, we need to go and educate people that these laws are unjust. And after educating them, we will negotiate. And in case the negotiation doesn't succeed, we will resort to direct nonviolent action. So, engagement, negotiation, then direct nonviolent action. And he said, we need to suffer. We need not retaliate. This is the message. See, today so many statues are being pulled out. In America, in England, in England, they pulled down the statue of somebody who was a slave trader. In US, they pulled down the statue of Columbus as well, because he discovered the sea route to America. And that, route, in fact, became the route to cause genocide of the Native American Indians. Okay, so why this anger? Why this pent-up, anguish is guiding and motivating people to pull down statues? Because every form of injustice, because those statues represented an a kind of a action which perpetuated slavery and which carried forward slavery and perpetuated racial inequality. So similarly, those statues have been dismantled. So we must understand the magnitude of anger. Both Gandhi and King used to say that we must accept the fact as it is, examine the fact, then take necessary actions to change it, to modify it, to rectify it, to promote the cause of nonviolence. Mahatma Gandhi said acceptance of a fact is a form of nonviolence. Martin Luther King also said the same thing. So therefore, these approaches are so relevant today in the context of a counter-revolution which is anti-science, which is based on superstition, which is based on myth-making. Okay, so therefore that approach of Gandhi and King, is extremely critical to address the challenges that you are confronting. And and once we accept a fact, once we understand a fact, then the reasons behind, that particular fact can be analyzed, and then corrective actions can be taken. So therefore, it's remarkable that Martin Luther King was so deeply impacted by Gandhi to train people in the methods of nonviolence, so that they can accept a fact, address it by understanding the reasons behind it, and later on take measures to rectify it. Okay, so that is the reason why I think this particular revisiting, the approach to revisit Gandhi and King is extremely critical. See, in Champaran in 1917, Gandhi broke the law, and that breaking of a law led to the Champaran Satyagraha. And eventually, from the breaking of a law, it led to the framing of a law. So breaking of a law to the framing of a law encapsulated the nonviolent struggle. Okay, so similarly, Martin Luther King broke the law which, was the seat anchor, for segregation. He broke the law which was denying the blacks, to get registered in the list of voters. He broke the law which, denied them the opportunity to sit along with the whites. And that breaking of the law led to the framing of the law. And eventually blacks got the right to vote. Okay, so therefore, this creative, as Martin Luther King used this word, the creative tension caused by nonviolent method, must ensure us a society based on equality, fraternity, and brotherhood. I mean, equality, fraternity, and solidarity. Now, the point here, I would like to, quote from a particular article, letter of, letter of Martin Luther King, which he wrote from Birmingham jail in 1953. He said that, we need to have a religion. Both Gandhi and King, they talked about the necessity of using religion in a creative manner. As I told you, Gandhi derived the lessons of nonviolence and satyagraha from different religious streams, from Hinduism, from Greek history, from Islam, from Christianity. Okay, I mean, look at the way, this is a confluential approach he adopted. See, today when Islam is unfairly associated with terrorism, even during pandemic in India, people are trying to say that, this pandemic has been taken forward by people belonging to a particular religion. It's terrible. So, Gandhi and Martin Luther King, they said we need to use religion not just for otherworldly purposes, both for sacred and secular purposes. So today, this sacred and secular, quite often, in America, in India, now there is a strange kind of a, counter revolution emerging, which is undermining that secular dimension. So Martin Luther King talked about sacred and secular combination. Exactly the same thing Gandhi also talked about. So therefore, when you talk of Black Lives Matter, and when blacks have separate churches and whites have another set of churches, this differential, opportunity, differentiation, the othering the blacks, the attempt to other the blacks, or for that matter in India, the attempt to other people belonging to a particular faith or people belonging to a particular caste. We need to fight that. So therefore, the spirit behind the Black Lives Matter is as relevant in India, as relevant in US, is as it is relevant in, in India as well, in many other parts of the globe. So the last point I would like to, he said that today, if you look at this movement, Black Lives Matter movement, you find not just blacks involved in it. There are whites. There are even now, the support is coming from the top government functionaries. So exactly the same thing Martin Luther King said, white ministers, priests, and rabbis of the South would be among our strong allies. It is not just a mere movement by the blacks or for the blacks. It has to be a movement of all. It just cannot be confined to only blacks. So this confluential nature of the movement is significant. And therefore, when we talk of Black Lives Matter, we talk of the, material significance of all lives. So if you interpret women's rights are human rights, so then we can say the blacks' rights are also human rights. So therefore this broad, expansive interpretation of Black Lives Matter can be made possible if you can invoke the insights from Gandhi and Martin Luther King. So I hope I have not exceeded the time constraint, time limit. Hello. Hello.
Yeah, hello. Yeah, thank you so
Yeah.
much for the talk. It was very insightful to hear about the role that Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. played in the non-violence organization against
Yeah.
racial inequality. So there are a couple of questions. So first question is by Varnika Mishra,
Okay.
and she says, "Hello, sir. Thank you for an enlightening session."
Oh,
Uh,
wonderful. Thanks.
she mentions the MP from UK, Bhiku Parekh, who has talked about how a revolution can't dispense with violence, but successive governments play an important role in channelizing the anger of the masses in construction of a new social order. And she asks you, what would this new social order be in case of America?
Okay. This is exactly the same point, channelization of the anger of the people in a creative manner. That's what both Gandhi and Martin Luther King emphasized on, and they put that into practice. So the kind of new social order, as I can see, it is very difficult to have that social order where there would be equality of all races, So, the new social order, which one can foresee emerging, from this movement is that there would be more emphasis, I think, by the institutional mechanisms available in the US to stress on racial equality. See, deep inside, social structures, there are entrenched prejudices, very deeply entrenched prejudices, which would take, I think, a long time to, to remove. It's not that easy. So, I mean, slavery has been abolished. Now, civil rights have been, and guaranteed to the blacks. Okay, segregation law is not there at all. But even then, what that policeman did to George Floyd was because of deep racial prejudice, which is entrenched in his mind. So therefore, the new social order that I can, think of, or that I can talk of, is that, the vibrant institutions of US, the courts, the, religious institutions, several other establishments which owe their origin to the Constitution or to the statutes, they must live by the letter and spirit of the Constitution. John Rawls, who gave the famous theory of justice, and that, theory of justice was given by him primarily, taking into account the emerging movements in US which were taking shape, the movements by blacks, the movements by women, the movements by colored people. Okay, so he was talking of, institutional basis of justice. He was saying that, primary goods like education, self-respect and self-dignity, or economic opportunities. These are, he called, primary goods. Everyone is entitled to have primary goods. And to get that, what was required was an institutional framework, be it in the form of court, human rights bodies, and so. These are adequately available there in US. They have to function as per the objectives enshrined in the statutes or in their, blueprints, which mandate such organizations to function for cause of everybody. So therefore, John Rawls' theory of justice assumes deeper significance. And again, Amartya Sen's idea of justice, that is also important, because Amartya Sen wanted to see justice in the lives of the people, not just in the establishment of institutions. So this combination of institutional mechanism for justice and justice in the lives of the people, that should shape the future society of America.
I would, I would also like to add that in reference to the question posed by Varnika, apart from making sure, like you said, that the judiciary functions better and fairly as it promises in the Constitution, the American people, especially the people of Minneapolis, have asked to defund the police largely, and have said that we need to defund the police and fund our education system and our rehabilitation system and all our other systems better, because because they say that policing more or policing heavily is not going to help the situation of racism, when police itself, the people believe that the police itself is a racist institution, because there have been files and documentaries about how the police itself was first something owned by the whites to control the blacks. They were called slave police. So the runaway slave. So they used to catch away the slaves that used to run away, and then they were directly changed into the US police. So they talk about how that institution itself is racist. So rather than giving them body cameras or providing them more training, more empathy, we need to focus on other things that will inherently make the society better.
Here in this context, I would like to, just flag one particular point. So these institutions which are there, which have been funded by the government, by the federal government or by the state governments, these institutions need to act as per the values of the constitution. So in the context of police, for instance, in India, in Odisha state of India, on 2nd October, on the 150th birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi, the government of Odisha put advertisement in the front page of all newspapers. And they quoted Gandhi of 1916. That quote was of 1916. He said, police personnel, they are not the masters of the people, they are the servants of the people. If this idea is ingrained that they are the servants of the people, not their masters, that would go a long way. See, we have a colonial, structure of police, and people also face police brutalities in India, police oppression in India. But then, this value which was outlined by Gandhi, that they are not the masters of the people, they are the servants of the people. So this police reform, which is pending in India for several decades, and now in US, I think the president of US, Mr. Trump, he talked about police reform. So therefore these are important points. These points need to be taken forward. And you are right in saying that, the funds which are meant for the police need to be spent for community. In India, my friend who is a police officer, he is Tamil Nadu Director General of Police. He introduced something called community policing. The police which is meant for community. He introduced in Tiruchirappalli in India, and he became, he got several awards at the national and the global level for introducing the idea of community policing. So we require that community policing as much as US requires.
Right. Okay. So I hope that answers Varnika's question. The next question is by Alia Khan, and she says she thanks you for the insights. And I hope you can hear me.
Okay,
Am I
thank
audible?
you. Yeah.
Right. So she asks, in the light of revival of the Black Lives Matter protests, do you see it having the potential to invite international solidarity from disadvantaged community in countries other than America, as organized as among the fascists of the world?
Oh, yeah. This is a real opportunity, across the globe, for, the several protest movements should align themselves with the Black Lives Matter movement. And particularly, people who are facing persecution by police, by the state structure, the disadvantaged sections of society. In the context of India, it is Dalits, minorities, and so on and so forth. Yeah, this is a, American professor, he in fact coined a term called, hello?
Yeah.
American Professor Joseph Nye from Harvard University, he had coined a term called soft power. Okay, I mean, we just cannot, the state cannot just employ a hard power and try to govern. More than hard power, what is required is soft power. And so hard power is based on, domination, compulsion, whereas soft power is based on person and action. Okay, so Martin Luther King, Mahatma Gandhi, they all represented that soft power. So America actually, in other words, what is called only a muscular, form of governance would not help at all. Rather, it lead to collapse of governance. So what is required is integration of soft power. So all these movements by the marginalized sections of society, underprivileged sections of society, all those who have been suffering a lot, they have been, engaged in movements, you know, they actually represent that soft power, that, you know, defiance, but based on nonviolence. You know, this is a great opportunity to, you know, forge that solidarity and fraternity, to strengthen the worldwide movement. Because as Martin Luther King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Okay, so if injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, so therefore, when there are, you know, forms of injustice prevailing in so many parts of the world, you know, then the movements to counter injustice need to come together to uphold the cause of justice.
Right. So, could I ask a follow-up question to whatever that you just said?
Yeah.
I wanted to ask that we have seen solidarity coming across from all over the world for the Black Lives Matter movement. There have been celebrities from India who have talked about Black lives, uh, the the violence against the Black people in America. But at the same time, we have seen movements in India itself, not and generally the Indians being very apathetic to them, or following the state's order or the state's propaganda. So considering that in America, it is the marginalized communities fighting against the state and very directly fighting against the racist and homophobic policies by President Trump. Considering that MLAs and people from Delhi like Kapil Mishra, they're, they're giving their support to the state, American state. So I was just wondering, do you think at this time where the Indian middle class is known to support the state whenever there's a crisis, would the Indian middle class really extend their solidarity towards the marginalized of America or the American state?
No, it's a very, I think largely in India, this movement for, you know, Black Lives Matter has been welcomed, you know, except the fringe groups, the right-wing fringe groups. Largely, they have welcomed it. You know, if you look at the writings, you know, which are finding expression in media, or the discussions in, you know, electronic media. So I think people have welcomed it to a great extent. And in India, you see, India, for instance, the protest against the CAA, you know, it was a very spontaneous protest across the country.
Yeah.
You know, there was no leader which gave a call for such a protest. And in spite of some leaders saying that some leaders who are controlling state apparatus, they said, "Hum badla lenge." But the protest didn't die down. Okay, it continued. Okay, so even now, you know, I just was, you know, seeing a mail, asking people to read the preamble, you know, by using the digital technology. You know, so what does it mean? Because that unjust law, which people felt that is unjust law, which was trying to take away the, you know, or trying to humiliate the one particular section of society, you know? They were trying to counter it. So I think, to my mind, the fringe groups might support the state, or, you know, for repression and all that, but largely it would have a very salutary impact in India.
Right.
It would act as a motive force, you know, to rise, you know, against the oppression by employing non-violent method.
Right. All right. So do we have any more questions? Let me just. All right. So it seems like we don't have any more questions. Someone is typing. So I wanted to ask you one more thing.
Yeah, please.
Which was, how exactly do we define violence in this context, considering that the American people, the marginalized communities who are coming out for the Black Lives Matter movement, they're taking down the statues of the slave owners. They are burning the Confederate flag and the police flags. they're also vandalizing the police property. And of course, a lot of conservatives have called this a violent action, and they're saying that this is not how revolutions are supposed to work, as opposed to the other activists who are saying that this is public anger and this is justified considering the kind of institutionalized violence the marginalized people have faced. And since they are at the very front fighting the idea of the police, so for fighting, so to fight for your rights and fighting for your right to live, they have to, you cannot dispense violence like they said, so they have to be violent in that case.
This,
But
hmm.
would you call it violence or would you call it defense? Because at some point we have to define that the protesters, they're not the ones who have started the violence, except they're the ones who are trying to stop the violence. And what do you think would be, if possible? I mean, uh, that's a very big demand. But what do you think? How would MLK Jr. or Mahatma Gandhi would view this situation?
Yeah, that's very nice. On this issue of removal of statues, Gandhi supported removal of statues
Hmm.
of those, army or police officers, who suppressed the first war of independence in 1857. During that first war of independence of 1857, after that successful suppression of the first war of independence, British governments, British government of that time, they erected several statues of those military and police officers who suppressed it. So Mahatma Gandhi demanded the removal of those statues because those statues represented suppression and violence and terrible cruelty on people. Okay, so he said because those statues represented suppression, violence, and terrible cruelty, so therefore they need to be removed. Those need to be removed. Okay, so many people supported Gandhi's decision, but some British officials, they said they asked Gandhi that you were talking of non-violence, but by demanding the removal of statues, you were promoting ill will against the ill will between Britishers and Indians. And ill will was a form of non-violence, violence. So Gandhi said, the fact was that those statues represented cruelty, barbarism, and violence. So there is nobody would deny the fact that they perpetuated violence by unleashing cruelty on Indians. So therefore, we need to accept that fact. So acceptance of a fact is a form of non-violence, Gandhi said. So once we accept the fact, then you obviously realize that those statues represented violence. So therefore, those statues need to be removed. So therefore, yesterday I was reflecting on this issue with a friend, and I said even Gandhi supported the removal of statues if the fact associated with those statues, they reinforced and reaffirmed the idea of violence, or prompted people to have a replay of that history of that era, replay of the history of that era, which was associated with violence, cruelty, oppression, and domination. So therefore, it is not a form of violence to remove these statues. We need to accept the fact that those statues certainly represented violence. So therefore, by removing that fact or that statue, you are removing those ideas or ideals of violence. So this is Gandhi's understanding. I think it is applicable here. Another point, non-violence Gandhi understood in multiple and expansive ways. Nonviolence, according to him, was just not, non-application of force or muscle power. Nonviolence, according to Gandhi, was promotion of education, removal of illiteracy, removal of poverty, improving the living standards of people, even reforming the judiciary and even the jails, empowering women. Okay, now if there is patriarchy in society, it is a fact. So therefore, to interrogate patriarchy is a form of nonviolence, because patriarchy, promotes the cause of domination, subordination, and so on and so forth. Or if there is persistence of, illiteracy in society, this means there is some form of violence in society. If there is inequality and poverty in society, this means there is violence in society. So therefore, all these forms of violence need to be addressed by promoting education, by opening the institutions of education accessible to all sections of society, by improving the living standards of people, by all such things. So therefore, this expansive notion of nonviolence is critical in the context of Black Lives Matter movement.
Right. Thank you so much for that answer. It was actually, I did not know that this is what Gandhi meant by non-violence.
Yeah,
the
yeah.
application of
Gandhi wrote a piece called Nonviolent Mass Action.
Right. Okay.
So in that piece, Nonviolent Mass Action, he outlined some 18 points.
Right.
To removal of poverty is a form of nonviolence. Empowerment of women is a form of nonviolence. And improving the standard of living of the people is a form of nonviolence. So therefore, that's why I say, when you say Black Lives Matter, so not just a crude physical existence.
Yeah.
So the blacks must get access to education.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Black women must be treated well. The blacks in America, the standard of life of those people must improve. So all that means nonviolence.
Right. All right. Okay. Thank you so much, sir. It was actually very insightful to listen to you and learn so much about the role nonviolence play and how the current organization is also following the nonviolent methods and how to view nonviolence exactly. And I would like to thank everyone for attending the lecture. And I hope that you enjoyed the lecture as much as we did. And so you can go and listen to the lecture again on our YouTube channel of In Dialogue, and you can also subscribe to it. You can also send us your questions in the comment section on the In Dialogue YouTube channel. Another thing, we will be back in the next lecture series at this very time in the next week. And it's going to be a lecture by Ambassador Ashok Sajjan, who has served as India's ambassador to Latvia and Kazakhstan. So I hope to see you in that lecture as well. Once again, thank you so much, sir.
Thanks. This is being recorded?
Yeah, this has been recorded and it will be uploaded on YouTube channel, on our In Dialogue YouTube channel.
Okay. Send me some pictures if you have taken any picture.
Absolutely, yes. Okay.
Just send me. Okay.
Yeah.
So thanks a lot. Thanks to you. Thanks to In Dialogue, our young friend and others. Yeah. That's great, wonderful. Joining all of you through this digital medium. Right. Thanks. Okay.
Thank you.